March 11th, 2021 TTC meeting to order. I've been reminded to read the emergency declaration pursuant to the City of Roanoke Emergency Ordinance adopted by the Regional Commission April 23rd, 2020 and 21. Virginia General Assembly Legislation SB 1271 passed February 27th, 21. The March meeting of the Transportation Technical Committee, TTC, will be held virtually on today at 1:30 via Zoom. The current state of emergency until further notice has been deemed unsafe to assemble quorum of public body in one place. Any members of the public may view and participate in the meeting through electronic means. Meeting details are also listed on the second page of the agenda. All materials made available to the members will be made available to the public at the same time by posting on the Regional Commission's website. Welcome, everybody. Christina, would you like to call the roll?
Yes. Mariel Fowler.
Here.
Peter Vollison. Cody Sexton. Dan Brew.
I'm here.
Megan Cronice.
Here.
Will Crawford. Chris Chittum. I see you muted there, Chris.
Here.
Okay. Mark Jameson.
Here.
Ben Tripp.
Here.
Anita McMillan.
Here.
Nathan McClung.
Here.
Dorian Allen.
Here.
Liz Belcher.
Here.
Nathan Sanford. Dan Sonnenklaar. Michael Gray.
Here.
And our non-voting member, Kevin Jones. Okay, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Christina. Let's move on then to item 2, approval of the consent agenda items. In the consent agenda, we have the agenda itself. We have action on the February 11th minutes. And then we have C here, this recommendation on the percentage of deck area bridges in good condition. I think staff's going to talk a little more about this, but I felt like since it wasn't something we necessarily needed to spend a lot of time discussing, since we were adopting VDOT's targets, that it would be okay in the consent agenda. If someone wants to pull it out for separate discussion, we could do that, but we'll need to do that kind of mechanically through a motion, and then we deal with the rest of the consent agenda, and then we deal with that item. So, Christina, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, Mr. Chair, we had not planned to speak any more to that item except what's provided in the staff report so that it could be considered as part of the agenda, the consent agenda.
Thank you. Are there any questions about that? Does anyone need to discuss it more, or are we okay with going on ahead and approving the consent agenda? If so, I'll entertain a motion.
So move this, Liz.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I believe that's
Second.
Dorian.
All right. Thank you. Christina, do we need a roll call for this one?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mariel Fowler.
Yes.
Dan Brew.
Yes.
Megan Cronice. Yes. Chris Chittum.
Yes.
Mark Jameson.
Yes.
Ben Tripp.
Aye.
Anita McMillan.
Yes.
Nathan
Yes.
McClung. Nathan. Dorian Allen.
Yes.
Sorry. This is Nathan. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Liz Belcher
Yes.
and Michael Gray.
Yeah.
Okay, the consent agenda passes.
Thank you. Takes us to item 3, chairman remarks. I don't have a lot. I do want to say I apologize for having kind of a busy agenda today. We'll try to move through it as quickly as we can. I want to draw your attention just a little bit to 4B, the needs assessment. When we get to that, try to think of it more as a list of I hesitate to use the word problems, but maybe issues. We've had some discussion about how that should work and how it would be viewed, and needs would sort of come in a latter step. I think some of our some of the other folks are going to talk more about that. In 5, when we get to the STBG stuff, I think everybody kind of understands that pretty well. So, hopefully, like I say, if you have any questions, we'll just try to handle that. Please feel free to speak up, but I am going to try to move us along a little bit today. So we'll go on then to 4, continued development on the Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan. Item A, regional study and transportation project prioritization for economic development and growth. I believe that's Eddie.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you look in your agenda package, pages 10 through 15, I believe, yes. You'll see a staff report for the update on the regional study for transportation project prioritization. You see sort of an outline of the tasks that we've accomplished so far as meetings with the steering committee, the online business survey, things like that we did back in the fall and winter. Past couple of months, we've been working on reviewing the identified needs list, trying to clarify and categorize all the needs correctly based on what we've been hearing from the economic development staff and some of the other stakeholders. If you look at the list, is still quite long. We had sent out the entire list to the stakeholders group and in turn asked them to send back their, 10 highest ranked needs. The list that you're looking at today has their, their votes for the greatest needs in the Roanoke Valley as far as transportation needs that would impact economic development. I guess if we were using the list as sort of a starting point for the TTC or TPO to begin looking at some solutions or projects or prioritizing, as sort of Chairman Tripp was saying, prioritizing the needs, maybe starting with the projects that have been selected as, three or four times in that one column there. Some of these are, well, it covers the whole gambit of transportation modes, and from the airport to pedestrian. So wide variety of needs that have been identified for the TTC to take a look at. I guess today we're sort of looking for direction from the TTC about what the next step should be, what you would like to do with the identified needs. So if anybody has any comments, questions.
Any comments or questions? Thank you, Eddie.
Mr. Chair, this is Megan. I have a few questions.
Go ahead, Megan.
Thank you. To start with, under options for next steps, it seems like you're asking questions, Eddie, about how to move forward. I was wondering what the timelines would be for steps A and steps B.
I think that the two options, one is sort of doing a standalone needs ranking for the economic development study itself. The other option being sort of rolling these needs into the long-range transportation plan update schedule, which I'm not exactly sure what that schedule is. I think if we do it just for the economic development study part of it, based on our internal schedule, that would end with the fiscal year. So hopefully we would have something, depending on what the TTC does with it and how long the TPO reviews it and looks at it, we would like to have that done by June, obviously, to get it done. Now, the long-range transportation process, I'm not sure the exact schedule of that or how this would be rolled into that, but I think, at least it seems to me, that economic needs are only one sort of subset of all the other needs that are in the long-range transportation plan. I mean, they're important, they should be considered, but there's also safety and pedestrian and a lot of other things that are going into that long-range plan.
Mm-hmm. My thought was the sooner the better, that it's done and wrapped up, especially as we've got new funding windows and opportunities opening up later this year. And then Smart Scale seems to never end. We've got, pre-apps due in March of 22, right, in a year. So that was my thinking on that. And then looking through the needs, I was interested to see the result of that process, but it seems like we've already started addressing a number of those with some of the projects we've gotten funded or projects that are under construction. So some of these, I guess, seem like we're kind of addressing them already. So are they going to be in the study even though we're making progress towards trying to address them? Or is that the TTC's role is to say, well, hey, we've made progress on this one, so we can focus on something else?
I think we would rather have the TTC make that decision if something, you'll see a lot of things in here, just using I-81 because it's the easiest example, and almost everyone thinks I-81 is important for economic development. But I mean, there are projects already going on. When do you take that off the list of priorities? How far along do you have to get with a project before it comes off the list, I guess. And I would rather have, since I'm not a transportation planner, I would rather have you guys sort of make that decision. I think that's a little bit better. Some of the other things, I know when we were going through the process, we looked at that issue that there were solutions that are or projects that are underway, and there are also several projects listed on here that already sort of have plans already set for them. So how do we incorporate, I guess, something that's under construction, something that's planned for, and then something that no action has been taken on yet?
Right.
Yeah. And do we combine those three types of projects into one sort of priority listing? How do you do that? And how do you rank them?
Okay, well, and if that's the role of the TTC moving forward, then that sounds great. I just appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
To add just a little bit to what Eddie said there, I think that like this information and some of the other things we're doing with the needs assessment should be seen in the context of kind of replacing the TED study and updating the TED study and coming up with something that is reflective of our priorities as a region. And so I think as we move through these processes, this is a bit of information and that's a bit of information. And we, the TTC, in working with the TPO, will come up with some list of what we think those are and recommend them to them. And so that's the context I would try to look at it in, Megan. Does that sort of make sense?
You started off by saying you thought that this would replace the TED study?
No,
so we wouldn't have one anymore?
I mean, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the TPO, having accomplished a lot of things on the TED study, would like to update it, right? And
Agreed.
several of us commented on the language that was changed at the TPO at the last meeting, which also broadens it into other things that are priorities. And so what I'm trying to say is I think some of this work with economic developers has to do with kind of figuring out what those next projects in the successor to the TED or maybe keeps the same name or whatever, what that's going to look like. And so what I mean is I think this is part of that whole process along with other parts.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, may I also help address Megan's question about the schedule?
Please.
So with Smart Scale, the next open application cycle starts a year from now. And then we've got STBG applications due in September. So I'm not sure, I guess, what kind of guidance maybe the TTC is looking for in the timeline of that. I think that if we were to have the TTC look at all of these needs and work through the process that we're going to share in a minute for the Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan, then we would be able to meet the Smart Scale desire for a year from now. If you're looking for immediate guidance on what to apply for economic development purposes for STBG, that's a much tighter time frame, and I'm not sure that we would be able to work through the whole process by September. So it's kind of how do you look at it? I think one of the things that the TED study brought that was lacking in the current Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan is a highlighted list of projects. And while we have project lists within the Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan, some of those have already been funded, some of those are studies, some of those are really far out pie in the sky. And so there wasn't this highlight of which ones do we want to pursue right now, or really that concerted effort at that time. And so I think that that's something that we can work with within the Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan to highlight those projects. And so if there's something that's not in that plan today that's important to get consensus for the group as you look at applying for STBG, for example, because that's the most immediate next big one, then we should look at that.
Okay. We also anticipate requesting SCBG funds as match funds for Smart Scale. So that's why I'm looking at these next deadlines. And I know that the TED study most benefits the Smart Scale application process, but backing up to SCBG in September, this time flies when you're having fun. So,
and one other
my
point,
thought, the sooner the better this is wrapped up, the sooner we can be focusing on working on the applications and getting them ready for the application deadlines.
and the TED study will only be relevant for STBG in terms of the conditionally committed projects. It doesn't affect committed funding. So.
Right, but if something comes out on top in the TED study that we don't anticipate right now, and we want to move forward on applying for that in Smart Scale, then we need to be setting the foundation for those projects now. So I'm just trying to get ahead as best we can and not be behind.
Yeah, and
the county seems to.
I'll jump in there real quick too on that one. Whether we're talking about STBG or Smart Scale, it would be good for any project that's submitted for STBG if we can coordinate it ahead of time to have, our VDOT folks take a look at it, especially if it's going to be something that is expected that VDOT would administer that project. So it's going to be important that we have a little bit of time out in front of that to take a look at it, which is really kind of this summer. And the other piece is for the Smart Scale, we as a district are going to be asking localities to try to give us their idea of what they might want to submit, at least one or two projects in June. So we can start working on them. Last round, we had 60 projects we worked on, and that workload is just not sustainable. Nor is it necessarily the best thing, because if you look at the number that got funded, versus the number that were submitted, we're less than half, but typically it's much less than that. So the sooner that we can identify things, the better. My question before all this discussion started was, how are we going to get from the needs that are identified here? And I think that's what we're really talking about. How are we going to get from that list of needs that are identified in here to project recommendations? And one thing I want to throw out, do we want to start with the existing study and take out the ones that have been done and leave the ones in there? Or at least it's a starting point for discussion of what do we want our next list of 10 to look like? Because I think it's pretty important we move that along pretty quickly in the development of those 10 projects, so it can help shape STBG and next round of Smart Scale and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least as far as what we've told, the stakeholders and the other economic development folks that we've been working with, we were sort of working on the same timeline as that long-range transportation plan. So they were really asked to look at things in the 2040, 2045 sort of time frame, not 6 months from now. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at the needs that have been identified. Some of these are sort of long-term, and they realize, I think they realize that some of these are going to take 4 or 5 years to sort of line up. And we used one of the examples was the Amtrak extension to Blacksburg. That's something we've been talking about for 10 years, and sometimes things just suddenly happen like it did this year, and we end up with $83 million on a project, but it's for a project that's been talked about for a long time. So
It's also important to note, as I was looking through those needs, some of them have to do with air transportation, and the long-range transportation plan is a surface transportation document. So, I mean, I don't necessarily think there's a problem with an MPO saying they want this, that, or the other, or support this, that, or the other, but that may not be surface transportation like some of the air stuff is, but just remember in terms of like funding and stuff like that, there's not much the TPO can do in terms of like their STBG money towards, improving air service. They can improve access, not air service. So I think we got a mix of needs in there. A lot of them are, fit the bill of being surface transportation. Some of them don't.
yeah, and I think as far as economic development needs, that was what people were looking for. I mean, and we told them that, we don't have any influence over the spending of what the FAA does or what the airport gets, other than the fact that we can sort of advocate for it or keep reminding our elected representatives that they need to advocate for improvements at the airport. So yeah, everything's definitely not just roads and buses. So.
Any other questions for Eddie? Okay, Christina, do you need any action from us on this item?
I believe that in the staff report, it had asked for advice on preferred option for how to continue with the next steps. So there were two options provided.
I mean, I'll go back, and my recommendation would be that we start with the existing plan and then look at, what has been funded. And here's the risk of this. If it's a funded project, it's one thing. If it's a completed project, it's another. So in some instances related to like 81, I think we're in pretty good shape, except for that one piece down on the other end of, 137 headed up the mountain. But we've got to still keep some focus on it just in case, the winds of transportation funding changes. I don't know that it needs to be in the top 10 list, at least maybe not all of it, maybe that one piece, but we still have to recognize that we still need some momentum behind it and keep momentum behind it so we can keep these projects moving and there's no risk of them disappearing. But I mean, I think I go back to, we have a list of potential projects. Do we want to start there with our discussion on developing the new top 10 list? I think that's a good starting point to me.
I think that's what we have tried to do. I mean, we sort of discussed that back in the summer, early fall, and decided to go sort of this way with it and ask economic developers to almost start with just a completely new list.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess what I'm hearing is that there is an interest in having 10 projects identified in the next couple months to help guide application development this summer, whether for STBG or for Smart Scale. And so that would be outside of the full Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan development process. Is that correct?
Is that correct, Michael? I feel like that's kind of your advice.
Yeah, I mean, with it, but that's just my opinion. I'm one member on this committee, so I thought when they told us last year, I thought they asked us to do two things. I thought they actually wanted an updated list last summer, and then to update the whole plan after that. So I don't know that there's a timeline related to the whole plan, but I know they had an interest in, hey, we've got a bunch of these things funded. We need to update that list. But I would think we would want to keep the momentum to go ahead and, utilize the information that's provided today, with these needs or ideas that's coming out of the economic development folks, and see what the thoughts are coming from the members themselves here today about, what do we want to do? I mean, what do we want that list to be? And I just keep kind of going back to the list we already have. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but that's where I keep going back to, because I think there's a whole lot of things on that we still need to get funded.
Yeah, I
That's
think
my
that's,
recollection too.
yeah. Well, why don't we do this then? Why don't we kind of assume that we're working in that direction, that we're going to come up with some list that we'll all hash some of that out at a future meeting. And Christina, perhaps in the meantime, we could coordinate a little bit with the TPO about what exactly they want us to do with it, and what that's going to look like. Because I mean, we need to make sure that we're giving them what they want, and we need to make sure that they know and understand, what VDOT is saying here about the timeline. Does that sound good to everybody?
Does to me. I would just echo
Yeah, go ahead.
what Michael said. I mean, I do think that obviously the starting point is the existing TED study. So if there are projects that can come out, that's fine. I'm having a hard time imagining that the projects that were in there previously would come out. So theoretically, if we don't have a funding strategy for a project that was in the TED study, that's a good starting point. I do concur that we ought to at least have some idea of what projects might come out of the process in enough time that we might even be able to consider the use of SDBG money to leverage that if there is a thought that we're going to use that for smart scale. So as a starting point, we have what's left in the existing one, and we ought to at least have some idea of some projects in sufficient time that we could consider that for SDBG.
That makes sense to me. How about, at that future meeting, perhaps staff could bring us a list of the projects in the TED study and how we've made some progress to those. Would that sound good, Mark?
Absolutely. And I do think, I mean, we probably ought to push just a little bit. Sometimes I'm not sure that economic development staff necessarily is aware of all of the project application deadlines. And we need to communicate a sense of urgency to them so that we can be lined up at the appropriate time for the various application processes.
Sounds good. All right, anything else here on 4A before we move on? All right, thanks everybody. We'll move on then to 4B, the Consolidated Needs Assessment. Christina?
Thank you. So we are in the process of developing the update for the Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan to the year 2045. And what's useful about this process is that it looks long range, but it acts short range because we update it every 5 years. So it really only serves to guide our actions over the next 5 years and the next application cycles that we have to make decisions and choose which investments should be pursued in order to meet the needs that are identified as issues today and could be issues in the future. So in December, we had an overview of the needs assessment along with the citizen input that had been received in the survey over the fall. And we had also introduced our consultants, and we've got with us today David Jackson and Rich Denbo from Cambridge Systematics. We also looked, since the December meeting, we finished compiling all of the needs. We had shared them with all of the members, and then we met with everybody in January, February, and really had an opportunity to kind of dig down into your area of interest or your locality, and then also meet with the economic development folks and kind of roll in the needs that were being identified by the economic development folks, as well as other gaps that some members had identified in the needs assessment that we had drafted. So we've consolidated all of that, but many more records have been put down into either one point or one line so that we don't have many points in the same general vicinity, but all of the needs identified by location. And then, as I mentioned also in December, we were pursuing an OIB GAP grant technical assistance to help pay for the development of the process that we're undergoing. So if you recall, last year we had the second federal certification review conducted by FHWA and FTA for the TPO, and there were some recommendations related to developing our performance-based planning and programming processes. And so we have tentatively heard that will be receiving that GAP grant. They're waiting to go through some financial stuff on OIP's end, so they haven't sent out those letters officially yet, but I have been notified that they are working to get us that. So I'm very excited about that opportunity so that we can address those recommendations and really develop the process. I think I heard Michael talking about, well, how do we get from the needs to the projects? And that's something that will be developed through this Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan process. So we won't have that available for this initial list for the TED study, but we'll be working on it, so we'll have that for future efforts. I want to take a moment to talk about needs. As Mr. Tripp had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, there's been some confusion sometimes on what the word need means. And in the attachment in the staff report, we had explained how the word need is being used in this process, and wanted to, in a fun way, I'll share my screen and just explain in a different way that word need. So let's see if I can find it. Okay. All right, so a clarification on needs. And of course, this all comes from what the TPO had adopted a few years ago, which is this framework for prioritization. So whereas we've never really done a needs assessment like we're doing now, we've oftentimes just jumped straight to projects. We're going through this process now of looking at needs, prioritizing them, looking at how you might address the need, identifying projects, and then looking at how well did that investment address the need. So in a simple way, okay, to look at needs, solutions, and projects. People often say he needs something. We need this project, or we need this thing. We need I-73, we need another lane. We need this bike accommodation, whatever it might be. Here's an example. He needs cake. So why? Why does this person need cake? Well, it's his birthday and he wants to celebrate. Or, well, he hasn't eaten all day and he's very hungry. Or he has a headache. And so we talk a lot of times about what thing it is that we want to see without necessarily reflecting on why. And so what this needs assessment is doing is taking a step back and looking at the why. What is the issue that's going on? And so it may be that cake is a good solution, depending on what the need is, but there could be other solutions. And that's what we will get to in a future step of this process. So a solution might better be, we'll go out to a show, grab a drink with friends, get a sandwich or a salad, get some aspirin, more water. It depends on what the need is. And so cake could be the solution, but there could also be other things. Cake could satisfy multiple solutions, multiple needs, but there could also be another solution that better addresses a need. However, if cake is determined to be the best solution to whatever that need is, we then have to look at, on a project standpoint, what kind of cake? And so that's where the details come in. And so as we think about those projects that will be identified for the economic development growth that we're hoping to get out of the transportation investments, we need to really be thinking about what are those details. Because if it's his birthday and he wants to celebrate, he might not want a wedding cake. He might want a lemon cake. And so we just want to make sure that we're aligning needs, solutions, and projects. So thanks for bearing with me on a simple example, but I hope that that helps explain a little bit more about the differences in how we're using the words and kind of where we're going with all of this. So we're right now still in this needs assessment, having identified current needs. I'll stop that. Maybe I'll just pause there and see if anyone else has any thoughts on needs. Okay.
So Christina, this is Liz. I think part of my issue in looking at this needs assessment is that sometimes it is a list of problems, not necessarily needs. So I look down the column and I see speeding. Do we need speeding? No, that's a problem, you know, and so the solution might be more transportation road, or it might be less road. But in terms of the whole chart, it seems to me like in the need column, we often have the problem listed rather than, you know, the need. And sometimes the need, I think, is in one of the comment columns rather than in the need column. I mean, if it says the need is access to business, that's great, that's a need. But to me, if it says speeding, the need is speeding, to me, that's not a need, that's a problem.
And Liz, thank you for bringing up a transportation example. So needs in this sense are problems. They are issues that people or businesses are experiencing as they try to move around the region. So if they're experiencing speeding, that is a problem. So then the solution would be, how would you look to address speeding? So think about needs as problems. And we've identified in that list, the maps and the tables, current problems, issues that people have identified, whether it be through the plans, surveys, all the different sources that we looked at. And so how you address those problems will come later when you start looking at modal solutions. How might you address a need for additional access to a certain business if the current access isn't sufficient? It might come with multiple modes or different ways of addressing that issue of insufficient access. So we were hoping to get, we've spent so many months on this leading up to the draft that we sent out in December, and then working through refining the needs and then consolidating the needs. We were hoping to get the TTC's endorsement of the needs so that we could effectively move on to the next steps of the process. We do plan to share this list of needs with the TPO policy board this month. So that was a hope that we had, but it depends on everyone's comfort level of if you're ready to endorse the current needs, or if there's still more work we need to be doing with the current needs assessment. We do have the folks from Cambridge Systematics here today to talk about future factors, future considerations, future needs, and then also the next steps beyond that. So we're trying to take this one step at a time as we work through the process, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions about the current needs assessment.
Mr. Chair, may I speak?
Go ahead, Megan.
Thank you. I'm really impressed with the map and the bajillions of dots and all the data that goes behind them. And I appreciate the spreadsheet. And I asked Christina and she sent me the Excel document so we could sort through it yesterday and take a closer look at the needs that are identified in the county. And I would appreciate a little bit more time to go through those because, I mean, it's 6 + 8, it's 12 pages, 14 pages worth of needs to be able to spend a little more time with it, if that's okay. So I would prefer to wait until next meeting, if that's all right. It's a ton of great data. We haven't had a chance to go through it as thoroughly as we'd like.
Christina, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this
Yes,
is Anita. I agree with Megan. I would like to request additional time since I wasn't able to get into it as far as looking at in the town of Vinton. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina, is it possible for us to vote on it next time?
Yeah, that's fine. And I mean, we can leave it open, over the next month and just see what else might have been missing that wasn't captured previously. So that's totally fine. If it's okay with the TTC, though, I would like to still give the TPO a first glance at it. This month, we're going to be talking with them about the economic development needs along with the rest of the long range plan needs. So I think it's appropriate to do it all at the same time.
Yeah, I have no issue with you doing that. Does anyone else? All right. Okay. Well, then let's.
Hey, this is Michael. I have one quick question.
Sure.
When looking at the maps, and I agree, this is a lot of really good information, and I like that we're using, survey information, we're using studies, we're using a lot of various things to kind of put these together. But we have all those different maps that show it, and then we have one that's consolidated needs. I'm not sure if I'm understanding what the consolidated needs are.
So Michael is just being able to see everything on one map. And Rachel, maybe I see you popped up. If you want to speak more to that.
Michael, the consolidated needs are because sometimes we had like half a dozen or more points that were all pretty much in the same place. They might have been about different needs. Some of them were about the same needs or same suggestions. Some of them were different. Or we might have had several points along a road that is just made a lot more sense to turn those points into a line. Just to try to take this massive information and distill it down into something more manageable.
Okay, because what I was recognizing because I kind of had all of them up and I put them about the same viewpoint and I kind of scroll between them. It's a massive amount of information, but I kept looking at me. Okay, what's jumping out? Which corridors are the ones that seem to be lit up the most, or whatever? And then I looked at the consolidated, and to me, it was like I looked at the 460 corridor. Tons of stuff along that corridor, from safety, congestion, head. I can't remember if there was transit stuff over there, access, things like that. But when we get to the consolidated, there wasn't a whole lot, as much as I would have expected. And then the opposite of that would be part of Melrose that didn't show up. Like if you scroll through looking, it didn't jump out as much. But then when you got the consolidated, there was dots all along it. So I was trying to, in my mind, figure out how we got to that point of one that I thought would be lit up is not, and then one that wasn't lit up is. So anyway, that's kind of two that jumped out at me without going into a whole lot more, level of review on my end.
And the reason some ended up with more dots afterwards is because as we had all these meetings with individual localities and agencies, some things end up getting added, and particularly transit, which has had a lot going on Melrose. And there just wasn't a really logical way to turn those transit dots, which are about very specific bus stops, into a line. And then your orange or 460 example is a perfect example of how I tried as much as possible, or we tried as much as possible to not lose any information. So it all got into a single record or a small number of records in the database, a small number of points and lines. It is possible that we lost some information in there, but we also felt one of the motivations behind doing this consolidation is that it's misleading to try to look at it and say, oh, there's a lot of dots here or a lot of lines here, so this must be really important. Because that's not the various sources we were drawing this from, wasn't an unbiased selection. So some things would come out as really important, but it was more about the fact that there was a lot of I-81 surveys or something like that. So, hope that makes sense.
All right, I'm just
go
ahead, Mike.
Go ahead. I mean, I can ask questions about that later, but I was just trying to understand it because, at the end of the day, if a citizen looks at only the consolidated list, they're going to think there's a ton of stuff on Hirschberger and not very much stuff on one of the other routes that had tons of dots on them. So, and to me, when I looked at the Hirschberger ones, they were very specific. I mean, to the point of, this location, this location, this location, this location. And it seems like we took that away from some of the other corridors of not saying this location, but having maybe one dot that kind of tried to cover it all. So it's a perception issue as much as just trying to understand how it was all put together.
Mr. Chair, we'll be happy to meet with any member who would like to follow up with us individually, and then just take a look again at the consolidated needs based on the comments that have been received today.
That sounds good. Thanks. All right, let's move on here then to 4C, future factors and next steps. Christina, would you like to introduce them, or?
Yeah, just welcome again to our consultants from Cambridge Systematics, David Jackson and Rich Denville.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is David Jackson, Cambridge Systematics. I just shared a presentation I'm going to walk through with all of you quickly this afternoon. And actually, I should bring myself up on video also, so you guys can see me as I'm speaking. There we go. So today what I want to do is quickly walk you through the story that we've been developing as it relates to future factors. And the idea of this future factors research is to think about these long-term issues, and Christina mentioned this earlier, regarding what we consider as we work towards accomplishing the region's vision within the Roanoke Valley Transportation Plan. So the presentation today is intended to walk you through our kind of rationale and thought and some of the findings so far from the research and how this is all going to work in the grand scheme of the total long-range plan. So since our last brief presentation on the plan with you all back in December, we've been obviously working with Christina and her staff to refine and lay out the approach for the overall long-range plan. I know this graphic was included in your packet for the meeting today. And what I wanted to do is just kind of connect the dots for you a little bit so that you understand how this future factors component of the process is working. So as we just talked a lot about, obviously the journey kind of so far, and the dark green at the top is focused a lot on this needs assessment process. The continuing work, and obviously the continuing work of the economic development team is providing the platform for what we're up to now and over the continuing months through the spring and early summer, which is where we're focusing on these future factors. We are going to work with you to develop the plan vision and goals through 2045. And then as the consolidated needs and the universe of needs are refined, establish and implement a process to prioritize these needs, so we can then move forward confidently into what we're up to next, which is thinking and transitioning from needs to solutions, which is ultimately the goal of the plan and what we'll be starting to work on this summer, and then obviously leading to a complete plan later this year and through adoption next spring. So the purpose and what we're talking about with you today is to share with you the research we've conducted on these trends, these future factors, which have been overlaid with recent regional plans. And we're doing this so that we can assemble different topics that we might consider as we develop plan goals and objectives, we prioritize those needs, and then we start to develop solutions. So we're kind of right here in the middle of the path towards finishing and developing the new regional plan. So a little bit about these factors, and what I'm going to do is walk through 5 different factors we've investigated, give you some examples, and then open it up for discussion or questions. So the factors, obviously, there's a wealth of sources everywhere that you want to look, really, including media, research, industry, et cetera, as well as current policy discussions, both here in Virginia and at the national level, that can provide sometimes, I guess, confusing or contradictory information on the diversity of the topics we have up on this slide. What our team has done is try and sift through all this information and characterize it across these 5 general themes: technology, society, economy, sustainability, and funding and finance. Recognizing that these 5 areas are all mostly things that are outside the sphere of transportation agency control. Transportation agencies have to respond to and work with their partners in these areas to decide how to deliver transportation to meet changing needs that are kind of dictated by these factors. So as we think about these topics and work through building the plan, what we're trying to do is ask some important questions, which first of all is just in part to help increase awareness and understanding of how these trends and some of their associated opportunities and challenges will play out possibly in the Roanoke Valley. They can help inform the goals and objectives of the plan. They can, in a way, stimulate the conversation about prioritizing those needs that Christina talked about a moment ago, and then also provide information to all of us on how to shape priorities and ultimately some of those solutions that the plan will develop to address the needs. So to start walking through each of these, and I'll just spend a moment or two on each of these slides for each of the 5 topics. So starting with technology. So I think that this is one that's easy to talk about and we can talk about for a very long time. And certainly, you know, as we all have experienced over the last year through our everyday experience, you know, we are now a lot more comfortable living in a more virtual business and decision-making environment. That's an example of where technology has done a lot of good. There are certainly a lot of places and pieces of these technology trends that will impact transportation's future in the Roanoke Valley. So obviously connected and automated vehicle technologies, different goods delivery technologies, including, for example, drones that we've seen in some states and regions using to help manage traffic, but also to deliver important medical goods, for example. Expansion of broadband, which we know is a very important in Virginia through the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative. And then this evolution of these different subscriptions to mobility services, whether that's on-demand transit, Uber, Lyft, scooters, or whatever comes next, where there's this increased idea of purchasing transportation as a service rather than owning a car, for example. There's a lot of examples out there, as I stated. A recent example, for example, would be Walmart recently setting an example of a zero emissions business model through 2040, which essentially means electrifying a fleet of thousands of vehicles by 100% through 2040. So that's a significant technology change and a commitment by a corporate leader to do something like that. And you see, as the figure depicts here, that these things can happen in many different ways. Driverless vehicle technologies could transform how we travel growth in different options, how we use transportation. Unmanned aerial vehicles can deliver packages, monitor the transportation system, but could even move people in the long-term future. And then obviously alternative fuel vehicles and ownership models and modes of transportation. Many of these things, really all of these things, especially being driven by the private sector. So next area that we've looked a little bit into is what we call society. And this is a really big topic. And really what this is all about is how social changes impact future transportation needs. And this is obviously very complex and varied by place and group of people. Obviously within the Roanoke region, transportation preferences for different age groups, different demographic classes is evolving. Younger groups may be relying less on cars and seeking a different lifestyle, more urban living. Older people are looking to maintain mobility for longer. So need new alternative ways to travel when they may not be comfortable driving a vehicle themselves. Transportation services will need to keep up to these changing preferences. think we've also seen that equity, really, especially in transportation recently, is a definite area of focus. We've heard a lot from the new administration. A lot of evidence from USDOT points to a renewed focus on funding commitment to help transportation better reconnect places that have been disconnected in the past. And we think this is likely to be a new focus area in the next federal surface transportation authorization as well. So certainly something to keep an eye on as we move forward over the coming years and implement this long-range plan. Increased reliance on remote services. I think many of us are a lot more comfortable today than we were a year ago in doing meetings the way we're doing this meeting, and in doing business in an increasingly virtual environment. So how will this trend continue in the future, and how will it impact transportation needs? And then obviously public health will remain an issue and a question, and how it impacts large public gatherings, mass transportation, et cetera, is still uncertain. This plan. So economy, the next topic. So I think many of the economic connections to transportation are obvious and direct, but there are a lot of indirect connections as well. I think one that we looked a lot into is really this connection of matching the region's current labor force to emerging job types and skills, and where there may be some gaps between where the economy is going and the type of workforce you have in the region today. We also know that today, and we suspect it will continue to increase in the future, is that the value of access that is convenient and reliable for the private sector is critical. And that's both to the markets that the private sector serves, but also to the resources it's using, including labor. Obviously, there's a change in thinking of the evolution and growth of a green economy, whether that's alternative energy or industries supporting building batteries for electrification of the transportation system. There are many opportunities there. We know that the virtual environment is shifting how we use services like healthcare, but also how we acquire goods. We're certainly seeing more shifts towards smaller footprint retailers. And then obviously the continued growth of Amazon and other distributors we all use on a regular basis. How we access goods and services continues to change, and definitely changes how we use transportation. And then I think we see and expect that the Valley will continue and its surrounding areas to leverage its values and assets in a tourism-based economy through new and innovative ways. So transportation provides access to those opportunities for recreation, ecotourism, entertainment, et cetera. So how does the system, transportation future network, continue to support that regional asset? So for the last two topics, we put these on one slide to kind of depict that there's a key connection between these two. So I'll talk a little bit about sustainability first. So I think much of the direction we're seeing here, I think is certainly kind of centered in this new era of corporate responsibility and commitment to addressing the challenges posed by climate change. And so retailers like the Walmart example earlier, auto manufacturers like GM and Ford that have committed to all EV fleets in the future, new EV heavy duty trucks. Volvo announced late in 2020 a Class 8 truck with a 600 miles per charge capability. So all of this is going to change how fast transportation moves towards this electric system. At the same time, there obviously be growing opportunities for alternative energy and more sustainable use and management of resources as revenues and resources for managing infrastructure continue to be pressured as use of this system continues. I think the challenge that some of this poses is, electrification of transportation will obviously change how revenue is collected for transportation in coming decades. It may also impact how transportation programs are funded and developed and lead to new types of funding programs and partnerships. And we may start to see some evidence of that in the next surface transportation bill, likely to come out, we think, in this Congress. I think also it's important to note that there's a lot of uncertainty in all of this, everything I've just noted. Not all these trends may always move in a positive direction for the region. Maybe economic shocks that increase costs or labor or materials that will impact the economy and what transportation agencies can deliver. Other impacts from weather events or other unseen events could obviously shift how we prioritize investments as well. So it's important to think about all of these trends in a long-range planning exercise from how they impact transportation and how they can shape how we build a plan. So in conclusion, I think just to get to, so how is this relevant? What does this mean? How should we use it? So I think the 2 points on this slide are that we know that as these factors evolve, and all of this today is kind of a snapshot of our current understanding, it will also evolve how we think about needs. So the current needs that we talked about earlier today are going to change over time and on every 4 or 5 years as the region updates a long-range plan. Perspectives on needs are likely to change with that as these factors change the region. We also know that these factors will impact increasingly how we think about solutions. And that happens by both how we build the goals for the plan, the objectives and performance measures connected to those goals, and then ultimately the solutions that address the needs. And I think part of what we've seen other plans in Virginia and elsewhere across the country do is begin to think about solutions that kind of check these two ideas of being robust, which mean they can kind of work well regardless of what future evolves, and be resilient, solutions that help the transportation system recover as change or different disruptions occur. So moving ahead, where we're taking this over the next month or so is Christina, in the next day or so, is going to send out an invitation for you all on the TTC to complete a brief survey. Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes, maybe as short as 5. And it's going to be an interactive survey that's going to ask you your own personal opinion on kind of rating the most critical of those 5 themes I just talked about, and then the most critical factor or topic within each of the themes. And then also your perspective on other things we should be thinking about that are particularly relevant to the region and this idea of future factors. We'll take your input to that brief survey over the next couple of weeks, compile the results, finalize our research, and share what we've learned before the next TTC in April. And then we'll begin at that point working with you to start talking about the Roanoke Valley transportation goals within the plan, and then also how we're going to use those goals and what we've learned through these factors to get into needs prioritization. So thanks for your time. Those are all my comments. Any questions or comments?
Thanks a lot. Any questions from the TTC? All right, hearing none.
Yeah, I've got a quick question. This is Will Crawford.
Go ahead, Will.
I've been researching some of the electrical vehicle information here lately, and I thought I heard you say that Volvo had released some information on a 600-mile Class 8 truck.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And I'll say, Will, that what we plan to do when we document all this is include a lot of references and links within that documentation. So you will have access to, some of the same sources we use for our research.
Perfect. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Any other questions?
So this is Liz. I had one question. I'm hearing from some people about, personal mobility devices, not necessarily on the road, but bypassing the road, or, people flying around. Is that one of the technology things that you're looking at?
So to some extent, yes. And I hinted a little bit on this slide at these, as drones continue to expand and grow larger, there's this idea of using them as almost like an air taxi service of sorts. They could, move people around. And there's, I think you've probably seen videos of these, and, tested and folks flying around in them in different settings. So yeah, I think that's something we would include in this summary of research for certain.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and cut off the discussion here so we can move on to item 5. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. I look forward to hearing more about that in the future. All right, let's move on to our next item, the recommendation on proposed adjustment to current surface transportation block grant STBG projects. Ms. Finch?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I provided in the staff report a whole lot of information as I know it to date. And I guess the news we were a little bit concerned about, given the pandemic and the decrease in travel having an impact on decreased revenues for the state, has come to light in the federal funding as well, with the decrease in SDBG amounts forecasted for the 6-year period that the 6-year plan covers. So we're going to have to adjust to that, but we're hopeful that it will bounce back and that we'll have positive news maybe next year or in a few years, because it has fluctuated in the past, but this is a fairly significant decrease. This does not include what might be provided through some COVID relief funding that might come through the STBG formula program. So there was some indication that that might be the case, but my conversations with VDOT, that is not reflected if there's going to be some amount given to the RVTPO through the COVID relief bills. So we are where we are with the money, and just wanted to mention also that the policy board last month had updated some of the policies in the STBG procedures that affect the development of the financial plan. So one notable thing is that we are able to look now out to year 7. And even though that year won't be reflected in VDOT's or the CTV's 6-year improvement program, that is whatever the TPO decides for FY28 will be valid for our purposes, and then we'll incorporate that into the CTV's 6-year improvement program whenever that's appropriate next year. So I also wanted to mention that I have been having a few meetings with VDOT about project schedules, and we'll be continuing to have those conversations over the next few weeks, along with individual conversations with project sponsors as needed, and that there will be, if the TTC and the TPO wants to pursue increases in funding for projects, there will need to be public comment opportunity on those increases before the board takes action. So we are looking to get TTC to look at several items that were listed under TTC action, and I need to get some advice from you on how to proceed with those today, share those with the board this month, and then we can look at developing that financial plan based off of those recommendations. We did get some more information about additional funding requests or money being returned, and that's been reflected in the staff report. And I think those are the big things for me to share. Are there any other questions before we start getting into discussion on the TTC action items?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is Anita,
Go ahead, Anita.
and I apologize. I should have caught this before the meeting. As far as the table 1 is correct, it's just the under page 63, under under TTC action listing, number 9, Christina. I think that should be the amount for the Gosnick Boulevard pedestrian bicycle crossing funding should say by 264,262,000 for a total of 403,912.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Sorry for that error. I'll look back at that.
Thank you. I apologize. I should have let you know earlier. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Ben, this is Liz. I had one question for
Go ahead.
Christina. So Christina, number 2, on the return of the 750,000 from the city, has that amount been confirmed by the VDOT financial analysis?
No, not that I've heard of yet.
So Christina, just to make sure I understand and everybody else understands, could you go over briefly the action portion, which I think is on page 61? These are the things that we're being asked to recommend to the policy board, correct?
Yes, and making a decision or recommendation about that today will help with being able to move ahead with developing the 6-year financial plan.
Okay, and I think we've talked about most of this before. Does anybody have any issues with this, or is there any other discussion about it?
Yeah, can I ask a question, please? This is Mark.
Yes, sir. Anderson?
Christine, am I correct that with the reduction in funding, before we allocate or consider reallocation of any of this additional money, we now are showing a deficit for at least fiscal 22 and 23?
Fiscal year 22 and 23. Yes, now just keep in mind that, I mean, this is a financial plan in progress. And so I've plugged in some numbers, but they're not necessarily in the best years. But it was more of an exercise to see, well, what can we fit? And I didn't try to do that with the top couple projects that had large amounts. So wanted to get a little bit more direction from the group before we started looking in more detail at some of those schedules. But I will say, you know, that it in order to accommodate everything, everything actually doesn't even fit in 7 years that's on here. And I think that it's in the negative by like $24,000. So even going beyond the 6-year window, we still don't have enough money in this forecast, with FY28 being an assumed amount to accommodate everything that's been proposed.
So there's some things in fiscal 22 and 23 that are going to have to move out timing wise to ensure that we match the available funding. In fiscal 27, with the money that we had conditionally committed for smart scale match, we now have consumed theoretically all of fiscal 27, correct?
Yes.
Which technically we don't have yet. I mean, that's not even in the program. This was out there and we said, let's go use that to leverage smart scale.
That was the case last year because the 6-year program only went to FY26. Now it goes through FY27. So that is part of this 6-year program. And then now FY28 is the new out year, year 7.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Are we going to walk through each one of these increases?
Would you like to do that?
Yes, please.
All right. Christina, can you walk us through it?
Okay, sure. So, and remember that the way that they've listed, they should be in the order that they're shown on the table, which was the order in which they were applied for and then prioritized and then awarded. Okay, so the older projects are on top and then the newest projects are on the bottom. So starting with the first one, action item number 1, increase Roanoke River Greenway, Green Hill Park to Riverside Park funding by $3,083,069 for a total of $7,673,829. So
Wait, okay, so what was the original amount?
previously they had been allocated $4,590,760. And so they're asking for an additional $3+ million.
Okay, all right. That's significant. Okay.
Hey, Chris, this is Megan.
Yeah.
Lindsay Webb and David Henderson are available to answer questions about the West and East Roanoke River Greenway projects, if you'd like to get more of the background.
I mean, what happened to drive the scope up to 75% or more of what the original amount was?
This is Dave Henderson.
Hey, Dave.
We've had a lot of issues with cost. A lot of the construction on the west is taking place down along the river. Frankly, in the river, going to have to build about a 1,000-foot causeway. And there's just a lot of risk involved with that. And as the design has been refined, I believe the risk and the difficult working conditions that the contractor is going to have to work with has been more realized. Also, there are 2 bridges on the project. And since the last estimate, I guess in 2017, there's been a lot of increase in steel prices. Frankly, between the 2 bridges across the river and the causeway, that's more than half of the cost of the project. And those items are really have been problematic for the project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next one is the Roanoke River Greenway, City of Salem line to Bridge Street. And that's the one that is going to be returning $750,000. There was something that happened with the agreement and I'm not sure what happened, but the full STVG funding was not reflected in the agreement with VDOT. And so the city was unaware of having that money available. And so the project's already moved forward with other funding. And so that money is not going to be needed on that project. So that's the return of that. Then the next one, number 3, Roanoke River Greenway Water Pollution Control Plant to the Blue Ridge Parkway is returning $2.7+ million. And Megan could speak a little bit more to that.
And I will defer to Lindsay or David as the experts on that project.
This is Lindsay Webb. I can jump in on this project. We are requesting to return funding related to this project. We've been working for the last 2 or 3 years on right-of-way related negotiations, and we're having trouble obtaining the right-of-way from residential landowners between Roanoke City and the Niagara Dam. So we are scaling back the project to build smaller sections on the western and eastern termini where we have right-of-way secured. So that's what's reflecting the change in this cost estimate.
And this is Liz. I think it's worth mentioning, Lindsay, that, this is the county is taking some of their Roanoke River Greenway money and hoping that the TTC and the TPO will agree to basically move it to the west end. So Chris, part of this is, they realize that that's a big ask on the west end. So they're trying to make some accommodation given the different projects that they have to try to stretch the funding, so to speak.
Right, and I appreciate that. I'm looking at these figures and that's a lot out of whack on Green Hill to Riverside there, given the original amount and actually some of the others as well. So I appreciate, in effect, reallocation from one part of the greenway to others, which you know, I'm a big fan of greenways, and looking forward to the day that we have a continuous system in the valley here. So yeah, I was just looking at that first one really, and then some of the others, considering, you know, the additional in relationship to the original amount is, you know, what's going on here. Is there a trend that's driving the cost of these projects up, not by a small amount? So just that's kind of what I wanted to understand what's going on. So thanks.
Okay. The next one is exit 140 park and ride. So that one has been completely closed out in the VDOT financial system, so that one can get removed. Well, there's one that's highlighted on the financial plan that's not listed under TTC action. It's the Tinker Creek Trail extension, and there's no action at this time, though I'm going to be meeting with city folks to discuss that project because there was the potential of it needing additional funding at some future point. So just wanted to keep that one in the back of people's minds, but no action on that right now. All right, number 5 is the increasing funds for the Walnut Avenue bicycle and pedestrian accommodations from Wesley Avenue to First Street. And that one is requesting an additional $260,330 for a total of $805,580.
I can speak on that. That original cost estimate was done in 2016. And since then, as far as we're talking about, you know, the cost increase and also the utility relocation that will drive up this cost. And then the revised, this one is revised, or the most recent cost estimate by the engineer. Having said that, we do have one property owner not willing to participate in this project. So we are avoiding his property. So that's one of the reason too, as far as why the cost has gone up to about $260,000.
Okay, thank you. Number 6 is the Route 220 Super Street and Access Management Project. There are a couple options on how to proceed with this project. This was one of the smart scale applications that was not included in the draft funding scenario. And Todd's original request was the $924,000, which is shown under the committed funding, and then an additional $2,076,000 was given to make it more competitive in smart scale, which unfortunately didn't work out. And so there needs to be a determination on what to do with that additional conditionally committed funding. Unfortunately, I don't think we have anybody from Todd here today. And I did get an email from Cody just before the meeting. And he was saying that as of right now, they are planning to apply for the Super Street project in the next round of smart scale. So the preference would be to keep the conditional money if at all possible. And they're looking at other possibilities for phasing that project, but haven't finalized anything yet. So that's the feedback on that project.
Christina, just a quick comment, and you and I have talked about this before, I think. Could we see in the funding requests, the you know, in the Excel spreadsheet, could we see anything that is conditionally committed like that for smart scale in some other color, just to make it a little easier to see?
Sure. I've got it in a column all by itself right now. It's the only project that right now has the conditionally committed funding, but I can make that a certain color as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, the next one is number 7, increase Orange Market Park and Ride parking lot improvements funding by $892,526 to $1.2+ million. Megan, would you like to say anything about that one?
Sure. That project was originally created to try to help out the 311-419 roundabout, which unfortunately is a round 1 smart scale, and we probably estimated it too low. We did estimate it too low from the beginning. So the challenge with that project is it continues to have some pretty significant deficits to get to construction, which is anticipated to start well, at least go to add this year, calendar year. So there are some components that we're trying to continue to help out the roundabout project with by requesting some additional funding for the Orange Market parking ride and parking lot improvements. And part of that is one of the big things that was taken out was the curbing for that parking lot that we anticipated would already be in place when our project picked up, that we could pave within the curbing. And now the curbing won't be there. So we have to add the curbing and then do the paving. So the costs are going up, and we didn't anticipate maintenance and traffic costs either for the work that needs to be done with the park and ride. So, it's an attempt to get the park and ride and the parking lot to where we want them and to help out the roundabout project, which should go to construction here shortly.
Thank you. Number 8 is the Roanoke River Greenway East in the city. And this one, I have a note here in conversations with VDOT programming folks that this project, you might consider showing this as a study only project. There's some issues in the VDOT programming system. If there's basically a project that has some preliminary engineering money on it, but then no construction money to actually show that it's a fully funded project. And so it's actually beneficial to show to UBCs, if this project were to be given the $750,000 that it's requesting, as a separate line item, a separate project with the UBC number that's different than the study phase of it. So just some thoughts there, not just for this project, but maybe as we go forward, there are a couple other projects on this list that are study only. And what does that imply? Just for the whole program, the STBG program for the TPO, if a project applies for study money or PE money, but not full construction money, and does that, how does that relate to its ability to possibly be fully funded in the future, and how does that show itself here? So there's some options that are listed here under number 8. Consider committing the $750,000. I put here in FY28 because that's when the money was available, and then consider conditionally committing the money. So if the desire is to commit or conditionally commit, there's a distinction there. Consider requesting the project sponsor submit an application for STBG funding when the total construction cost of the project is known, or some other option. So a number of different ways to proceed with that request.
So Christina,
9.
this is Liz. You know, in defense of the city, that's fiscal year 20, and they haven't gotten an agreement yet from VDOT. So they had hoped to have a construction cost estimate by this point, which nobody's mentioned today, that the TA money is also open in the fall. And so there are options of applying, you know, for TA money also for construction of some of these projects. So unfortunately, they don't have a construction estimate yet, because even though it's fiscal year 20 money, they haven't gotten an agreement yet.
Lots of logistics and things going on for sure. So,
Mr. Chair, I apologize for interrupting. Christine, I apologize.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to step off for another call. I have some concerns over this process. I'm just going to say that I think collectively, we really need to strive to improve our estimating processes. My concern is that if we consider this action, we are literally consuming a significant portion of the potentially future available funds for future smart scale applications. We have much incomplete work left to do, including much of 460. And we are rapidly consuming all of the money, it looks like, in FY28. And I just have some concerns over that, because we still have significant regional priorities that we need to continue to try to address. So unfortunately, I need to step off. I will leave you with that. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Christina, would you like to continue through the list?
yeah, so Anita had already mentioned about number 9, the increase for the Gus Nix Boulevard pedestrian bicycle crossing funding was incorrectly noted in the staff reports. I apologize for that. It should be an increase of $234,262 for a total of $403,912. And Anita, maybe you can speak to the reason for that.
The original estimate was based on the estimate for Hardy Road that was prepared by a consultant back in 2016. Having said that, to be sure, staff reach out to Salem, VDOT Salem District, which we really appreciate that, and they have given us a revised estimate for that crosswalk. So with the redevelopment of Gish Mill, as you all know, that we received 2 grants for that redevelopment of that historic Gish Mill. We feel strongly that, you know, we really like for this crosswalk project to move forward as soon as we can. And we want to make sure that the money that, based on the cost estimate by VDOT, is basically a lot higher than what we applied for. So.
Thank you. Number 10 is the increase for the Oak Grove Streetscape Improvements Crosswalk project, increasing by $82,000 for a total of $218,748. And Megan, do you want to say something about that one?
Sure. VDOT gave us the first estimate for creating that project, the crosswalks and the ped signals. And then VDOT said we need more money. So we're requesting additional funding to implement that project, with construction hopefully starting in early 22.
Thank you. Number 11 is the projects that have been successful in the draft Smart Scale Round 4 funding scenario. So projects had either conditionally committed or hybrid conditionally and committed funding. And so this would commit all of the funding that had been identified previously and that was applied for in the Smart Scale process. So a number of projects there. And then the last one.
Christina, can I add one quick thing?
Sure.
On this one, I think the amounts for the last 2 projects, Route 460 at West Riverton and Route 460 from Carson Hunt Ridge, the new SCBG committed funding is actually the tentative Smart Scale Award. So the second 2 column numbers should have been moved over to the last column numbers.
Okay, I will make that correction. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, and then the number 12 is to remove the conditionally committed funding, $2.5+ million on the Route 460 alternate 220 intersection improvements, since that was not included in the draft Smart Scale funding scenario. And those are the items that I am aware of for this financial plan development.
Thank you, Christina. I guess to the, first question here is, are we in a position to deal with this right now? Are we ready to deal with it? Or are we ready to maybe deal with part of it? Or, does it need to come back or something like that? Christina, can you talk just a little bit about the schedule here? I know you've noted it in the applicant or the staff report on page 61.
Oh, in terms of the development schedule, well, yeah, so the plan was to share with the policy board this month all of this information that I'm sharing with you, plus recommendations that you all will provide on the draft financial plan so that they can authorize the public input process for any project funding increases. And then you all will be able to review, I guess, the results of making recommendations on increases and see how that lines up with schedules and fiscal year allocations that I'll be working on with VDOT and project sponsors over the next month, and then bring back to you in April. And then by the policy board's April meeting, they will be able to have the public input as well as the recommended draft financial plan, and then be able to take action on that. And that'll give VDOT and DRPT time to program things into the 6-year improvement program. I think unfortunately with this schedule, we are not going to be able to provide them the input that they need for the draft 6-year improvement plan. It may be that, depending on how the policy board takes action this month, we could include some draft information if we can provide it to them by the end of this month for the CTB's 6-year improvement program meetings. So wanting to get some direction from the committee on those action items today so we know how to proceed with developing the financial plan.
So I guess, with that in mind, and I'm sorry that Mark had to leave, would like to hear more about his thoughts, but what's the will of the commission here? I mean, what are you guys thinking about this? I mean, we could, if you're ready to approve some of them, we can do that together. We could look at them individually. Do you want more discussion? What are you guys feeling? Don't all speak at once.
Well, I mean, I'll jump in if nobody else says, but I've been, talking a lot today, more than usual, but I am concerned about us. I share the same concern with Mark, perhaps in a different way. We may be too far down the road, so to speak, now with these, but it looks like the way things are going is really a little unsustainable. And I'm concerned that we're we're creating a pattern where we are not living within our means, so to speak. And stuff that's already on the list, it's hard to say, well, no. And I guess I feel differently about a $200,000 crosswalk project than I do about a $400,000 crosswalk project. And when things depart so much from the original original cost estimate, I want to know what has there been any effort to go through what I call the disappointment phase of value engineering to make sure that we're trying to stay as close to the original estimate as possible, because that's the funding that's available. And seeing these come back through like this with the scale, I understand that the stuff that things cost more in a few years, but seeing the scale of increase on these is very concerning. And I think when you start to look in those out years of 27, 28 and beyond, there's not going to be anything there. And because we've already we've already busted the piggy bank and taken all the money that we've been socking away in future years. So that's my concern. I don't know if we could do anything about it now, if anybody else shares that sentiment. But that's what I'm feeling right now. That's all.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
If I may speak to Mr. Chittum's concern, as well as a comment that Ms. Belcher had made earlier about TA funding applications in the fall. In the SDBG procedures, there are a number of options that are provided as considerations in looking at cost overruns, and I'll just mention those quickly here. It's talks about scaling back the project, using local funds, using smart scale or other funds, using STBG balance entry funds, existing STBG funds from another project, future STBG allocations in the form of a phase 2 application to be evaluated during a future candidate list and rating, use future non-STBG funds, or drop the project altogether. So other things for folks to be considering as well.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Nathan, the town of Vinton. I just had a quick question about a few of the notes related to some of the surplus funds. I'm referring to the Roanoke River Greenway project that it says on the notes it's returning 750,000, not yet reflected in the plan. And then excess funding, if it's like 2.7 million to be returned as well. Do we know when those will be reflected in the plan? And is it possible that the total of that funds would kind of counteract and balance out these requests from this meeting?
Christina?
So, the financial plan is a different exercise, and it really takes a look at the schedules. And so I do have a meeting to discuss with Roanoke County staff and VDOT some of the county's projects. And so I didn't feel comfortable at this point making an assumption of where that funding could come from. I'm wanting to look a little bit more deeply at the schedules if it is the will of this body to recommend what has been proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I say something?
Ms. Cronice.
Thank you. A lot of the requests for additional funding are Roanoke counties, and we understand that we have asked for a lot, and we do appreciate the consideration. We also try to find money in every place we possibly can, and some of these projects do have, actually most of these projects do have other funding sources on them as well. We do appreciate that SCBG is the most flexible source that we do have, especially as the requirements for some of the other programs available to us continue to change on a fairly annual, regular basis. We also do work on all of our projects with our VDOT partners, and we do appreciate all their assistance and help. But I think we've also found across the valley that the projects that we estimated 3, 4, 5 years ago definitely cost more now for a variety of reasons. So despite our best efforts, we're still coming up at a loss. I use the Starkey Buck Mountain Roundabout as an example, that we put money into, county money into surveying that up front. We used a VDOT study in terms of what the roundabout could look like. We formulated a project, we requested revenue sharing funding, we requested SCBG funding, and we were approved, which was great. And we thought $3.2 million is definitely gonna fund this roundabout. We should be fine. This is a very conservative estimate. And then February of 2020, VDOT said, actually, we need another $3 million. And I went, really? Really? So we applied for smart scale funding and we received that smart scale funding. So, we're trying to do everything we can to fund our projects. And we did not come back and request additional SCBG. Smart scale did work out for us. So while I really do appreciate the comments that are made about, we need to estimate better. We're learning every round. We're doing the best that we can. And we are relying very heavily on VDOT for those estimates. So I just wanted to offer those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cronice. Anybody else generally? And then I have a question for staff. All right, well, seeing that it's getting late here, it's 3:13. We're a little past the time we thought we would end. Christina, is this something we need to take action on this month at this meeting, or is it something that we could delay until our next one?
Mr. Chair, I guess delaying action would mean delaying development of the financial plan, which would just put it later. It certainly does not have to be reflected in the CTV 6-year improvement program. The final action is taken in June for that. I think they developed the final in May. So even having an approval by late May by the board, I'd have to get maybe Mr. Gray to chime in on if that's still sufficient time to get it into the final 6-year improvement program. But really, I think adjustments can be made at any time to that 6-year improvement program based off of the decisions made by the board and the time that the board needs to make decisions.
Mr. Chair, this is Michael Gray.
Mr. Gray.
Yeah, Christine is correct on that. To get it reflected in the draft, we need something really soon, but it doesn't have to be reflected in the draft. We understand that MPOs across the state have different meeting schedules and different issues they have to address. So as Christina said, if we get it in May, then the system opens back up where we can input that new information and have it reflected in the final. And even then, if it doesn't get reflected then, it would be amended in later on. So, but you know, if you want to try to get it shown in the 6-year program, I would shoot for having it done by May.
Thank you. All right, well, folks, I mean, I think there's 2 directions we could go here. We can see about looking at this again at our next meeting, preferably with less on the agenda and more time to talk. And, you know, some of these conversations can be had offline between then and now, or we can go down through the list here of recommended for TTC action and vote on each one of them separately. What's your all's feeling about it?
Mr. Chairman, this is Anita.
Go ahead, Anita.
I would like, you know, because of the time constraint, I would like to, you know, if we as the TTC member can make that decision today. Having said that, I agree what all Megan has said. You know, as staff, we try our best to, you know, during the application to use the estimate provided by consultant. At the same time, you know, with all the assistance that VDOT has given us, we feel more comfortable with the figure that VDOT given us because of what all this cost estimate have gone up. So, I mean, I understand the concern that Chris and Mark Jamison mentioned earlier, but that's all. I mean, we have to work within what we have. So that's all I can say. So.
Thank you.
Chairman Tripp.
Yes.
This is Chris Chittum. I would just say move ahead. I don't think that you know, anything will get voted down next month, I don't think anything would change between now and next month. So I would just as soon let think. Like I said, I concede that we were probably a little bit far down the road and need to move on. My admonition was more toward the future and tightening up with solid estimates. Obviously, I know we can't see into the future, but we also build hefty contingencies. This might be a signal that we need to build in hefty contingencies into our estimates. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I guess with that, is anyone opposed to moving on and going ahead and taking action on these items?
So Ben, this is Liz. I would move actions 1 through 12, with 8 being 8A.
All right, we have a motion, and just to clarify, that is 8A. Just consider committing the funding $750,000 to Roanoke River Greenway East in fiscal 28. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, we would also need a choice on item number 6, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Liz, would you like to amend your motion?
Sure. So B is it goes back to Botetourt in fiscal year 28, is that right?
That's
Christina?
the option. Yes, that's the option, is to keep it as conditionally committed.
To Botetourt.
To Botetourt, yes.
Okay, 6B.
All right, so for clarification, we have a motion on the floor to approve all the items with option 6B and 8A. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note that those recommendations are listed in a priority order, and I had noted earlier that I didn't believe that all of the funding requests could be accommodated within 7 years. I think there's a deficit of $24,000. So that would have to come out of the lowest priority or some other proposal.
Yeah, we can figure out an IOU for them in the next year, right?
Yeah, we could take it out of 6B.
Is that an amended motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if it's the appropriate time, I'd like to second that.
Thank you, Ms. Cronise. We have a motion and a second. Christina, could you call the roll?
Okay, just for voting clarification, Mr. Jameson had left, and I think Mr. Wayne Leftwich is here, who's an alternate for the city. Mr. Leftwich, will you be voting for the city?
I can, if that's appropriate.
Okay. I think everybody else who was voting is still present. And I did notice, I guess Mr. Will Crawford had joined us. I didn't have him originally here, so just wanted to make sure I have everyone accounted for in terms of the voting. So,
Thank you.
Okay. Mariel Fowler,
Yes.
Dan Brew,
Yes.
Megan Cronice,
Yes.
Will Crawford,
Yes.
Chris Chittum,
Yes.
Wayne Leftwich,
Yes.
and Tripp,
Aye.
Anita McMillan,
Yes.
Nathan McClung,
Yes.
Dorian Allen,
Yes.
Liz Belcher,
Yes.
and Michael Gray.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the recommendations.
All right, thanks, everybody. That takes us to item 6, other business, the Unified Work Program. Christina, do we have to approve this in this meeting?
No, Mr. Chair, this is a draft. The substance of the UPWP for next fiscal year is provided in this document, and we'll be working on the budget over the next month and then providing the TTC with a final draft next month.
Thank you. Was there anyone who would like to discuss this? Otherwise, I'm going to move on with the agenda just because it's gotten so late. Is that all right with you, Christina?
Yes.
Okay. Hearing none, then we will move on to item 7, comments by members and/or citizens. Would anyone like to comment? Any citizens present? Okay. Hearing none, we will then move on to item 8, adjournment by 3 p.m. Thanks a lot, everyone. I know it was a long meeting and we had a lot on it, but I appreciate all of your hard work and your patience with it. Thank you to staff. We really appreciate everything you guys have done.
You're welcome. Have a good
Thank you.
afternoon, everyone.
Yes, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.